That music was so nice. I was going to take an extra couple of minutes and listen to the music. But we'll take calls if you have things you want to ask me about things you've heard in the news or want to share, pictures or television that's coming up this week. I noticed the Monterey Institute is having State of Siege. I made a note of that. I don't know how many of you have seen that movie. Do you remember the movie? It's a very good one, and it's about Uruguay and Dan Mitrione, the chief of police there, who came from Richmond, Indiana. And he worked with Jim Jones, who was a little bit younger than him, but they both worked in the CIA together. It's going to be at the Monterey Institute, September 30th, October 1st, this week, Friday and Saturday, if you can get over to see it. And it's about the oppression in Uruguay and the military dictatorship and the control that the police have over the people. And one police chief, Mitrione, is killed. Richard Nixon, Billy Graham went to his funeral. Billy Graham made a big fuss over him. He was quite a martyr, even though he was a very cruel dictator. I read that Reverend Moon is sending his money down to Uruguay. He's getting ready to move down there. He was indicted on various tax charges, and the appeal was turned down last week. So he has lots of millions he wants to send down there, and he's on his way. He's been working in Venezuela and around South America anyway. So that's Monterey Institute. The numbers here, if you want to call, if you have any questions, 375-3082. This is Kazoo, and I'll take calls if you have anything that you want to ask about or share regarding material that I have on the program or things that I have missed. There are some shows I know I've missed. I got a videotape from one of the listeners of the Larry McDonald broadcast, the one on terrorism. It was made the Monday before he died. Well, it was made before, but it was shown the Sunday after he was dead. It was advertised the week before I mentioned it, and I haven't had a chance to put that tape on yet. I have to go to a friend's. I don't have a videotape, so I'll have to go and do that at a friend's house. But if you want to call and ask some questions, I noticed that when Senator Jackson passed away, that the governor immediately appointed a Republican to take his seat in the House until the election comes up. Henry Jackson, was a Democrat, and the governor there appointed a friend of Ronald Reagan's into the Senate who's a Republican. Now, this happened before when Senator Williams was in the abscam net, and I might have mentioned this to you before on the program, but I'm not sure if I did or not. When he was caught in the abscam and was forced to resign from the Senate, we might have mentioned this last week, then a Republican was put in his seat. I don't know if anybody wants to do any research on that, on replacing congressional officials, but it seems to me that when you start switching political parties, you could do a lot of hanky-panky with dirty tricks or entrapment and getting people out of office so that you could replace their seat with the seat of another party. It seems to me that it would be more reasonable to replace a Republican with a Republican and a Democrat with a Democrat. Now, I haven't heard any outrage or comments by the Democrats about this, but I'll bet you that if a Republican senator died, or Senator Tower quit right now instead of running for election, and was not in the elections, and a Democrat was put in his seat, the people in Texas would not like it. I'll bet you if Senator Wilson, the new Pete Wilson, the senator from California, I bet if he passed away or had an accident or was caught in a scandal or something, and he was put in by people like Gerald Ford and Henry Kissinger and William Casey, the entire CIA establishment helped with his election, I don't think they'd feel that they did all that work to get a Democrat in his seat. So I feel that the constituents should get what they elected and not get a switch, because, as I say, it leaves the road open for a lot of hanky-panky, such as Senator Williams said he was fingered where other senators weren't, and it seems to me that you could pull somebody out and then stack the Congress with your own particular kind of people. Now, you can call if you have questions. I say 375-3082, or we'll talk about some more of these items. Lost in all the news of the plane crash, the Korean airline, was a story about the death of John Vorster. He caused quite a scandal. He was the former South African prime minister, and he put millions of dollars he diverted into private funds to buy newspapers in the United States and other newspapers around the world. He was put into a prison after the war because he was a Nazi sympathizer, and he was strongly anti-black, of course, in South Africa, part of the Broider Band, a racist. He stepped out of public life when he was involved in these scandals, but some of his newspapers are up in the Michigan area and Sacramento and radio and television stations, so that news sympathetic, say, to anti-blacks or to South Africa could be accomplished because the ownership is from South Africa, even though you don't recognize the name. And I think that poses another problem. I know after the airplane went down with Larry McDonald on, the news media was just a barrage of insults and slanders and statements against the Soviet Union. And I wonder if this is part of the ownership of these stations, that when these particular things happened, it was too well synchronized. The way they were out to get the communists. Nobody had seen a little black box. They still haven't. They don't know the cause of the accident. Well, the Soviet Union shot the plane. We know that. But they don't know what was on the voice box, or if there was a two-way conversation, or if they told them to land and didn't want to shoot them. We don't know any of that. So the question is, will a box be found? And if it isn't found, how can people be so sure what happened? What gives them the right to say, this is what happened? I know that the Soviets shot them and they gave them no warning and they are barbarians and so forth. It's so clear-cut and easy, and it's really scary. I'll mention more about it later on the broadcast, but it's really scary how easily people fall for this kind of business. And I wonder, like Hitler burning his own Reichstag parliament, if we're going to have a duplication of this, people will fall for it. They really are led to believe the first thing they hear, and that's very scary. It's scary for me because there's so many books and articles and magazines out on information, and I can't figure out why those people who are educated or who are reading these things are not calling the stations, or if they call and can't get on. I don't know if there's a way of screening, say, the major stations. People aren't calling now. I see you have a chance to ask questions. I say you don't call the house if you have a question. Ask and share it with everybody. Some people are shy, or they wait till the last minute when the time's about running out and call. If you want to call Kazoo, it's 375-3082. I might mention to you that they seem to be getting some new equipment here. The Q box is new, and they're fixing things up, and there is some trouble with the general wiring of the board. They need some machinery to help fix the wiring. I know when I want to make a tape of World Watchers, there's a sound that goes through on the tape that interrupts the sound. So I think if everybody wants to contribute, instead of talking for 1 minute, I can talk to you now and ask you, and also at the end of the first half hour, about contributing to the station and helping out, because they do need subscriptions, or maybe you can think of ways to raise money, help raise money soon on some projects. They haven't mentioned any fundraising yet, but I know it'll be coming up very soon. I see that we're going to have La Traviata on October the 2nd. It's on the bulletin board. Eleanor Bassett is going to put on La Traviata. Did any of you see the movie? I loved it. I saw it 3 times. Says a Mercury had a story this past week, space stations caught in political tug of war. Some of these articles that I have here are just like 200 most important stories, and I'll get back to them later at some point on World Watchers, but I think they're worth sharing with you now in case you want to discuss them. I've talked about the building of space stations for genocide, the book Alternative 3, that's very scary about the potential for these space stations for being used to transport excess population away from the planet Earth, cleaning it up for those who have the means to make themselves comfortable, and the others to be removed. That seems to be the intent of Alternative 3, that they're saying it's going to go this way. Well, this week, NASA, their head, James Beggs, said in July that the space agency would want $200 million to start up their 1985 budget. But they are arguing with the Pentagon and the Office of Management Budget and the CIA. They don't know who will get the bulk of the money, and the NASA Space Science Group are into a political tug of what to do to divide up the money that they need, what they say they need. The article had to do also with the picnic that NASA was having at the Space Center when they had to scrub their particular project because the Soviet attack on the Korean airline. And, of course, they always throw that in now. You see, this is used. That's the catch-all for getting more money, and look what we're in trouble. Paul Harvey was on one of the television programs this evening, and maybe some of you saw it. He's always telling little anecdotes on this is half of the story, and some of them are really interesting. Tonight he was talking about World War III, and just very matter-of-factly talking about World War III and how the Soviets have maps of ports, and we have maps of ports. And people have really accepted the fact. We need this weapon, they have that weapon. We'll take this port, you'll take that port. We'll strike first. We're on the defensive because when you attack us, we can attack back. We have this many missiles, you have that many missiles. Are you getting a little worried or sick of that conversation? There's not much talk about peace, and it's generally accepted by people that war is inevitable. When I started my research about 20 years ago, I had the feeling that this is the way the world would be escalating very rapidly towards that process. And now that we're just about there and they talk about it, in the evening news, it's very sickening to hear that kind of talk. A lot of people just accept the biblical interpretation of life. When it comes, it comes. I don't care, when the bomb falls, I'm ready. I don't think it would feel very good. It's true it wouldn't live very long, but I don't think it would feel very good. I always thought such a waste, but I don't know what the planet is saved for. If you can think of why it should be preserved for somebody, maybe you'd like to call and tell me. I really don't know if people have the ability to take care of it. There's another program this evening on the pollution, the Army base throwing I don't know how many tons of mercury from the atomic energy area in Tennessee, and just being one of the biggest polluters in the United States, totally free to pour out all this wasteful material going into the water now and polluting Tennessee, and how the Army just was complete abandon, threw the waste material out for years, and it was dangerous. And said, well, we'll see what happens. And another person was on the news. He has asbestos in the backyard. They were going to dig it up, and he's sick. But he says, I don't attribute the sickness to asbestos as long as they pick it up, and I won't breathe it. And there's a certain acceptance about anything that happens that comes along. Are there any of you that have a feeling about this? You can call if this is supposed to be a talk show. It's a time for you to ask questions if you want to ask them. If not, there's plenty of news here. 375-3082. Maybe the inability to express anger or outrage at some of these stories is part of the apathy. Maybe it has really locked in like lockjaw. And, that's pretty bad. But I see it a lot. And I guess we have to accept the things we can't change. You can try to change them, but I don't know what to do. It's going to make people really care again. I think there's too much going on for them to even zero in on one thing. They have these little human interest stories like Bobby's been in the bubble 12 years and it's his birthday and he has never touched anybody, or somebody else needs a kidney in 2 years. And it's easier for them to just reach to one subject, to one person, and not get emotional over hundreds that may be starving or being killed in different countries. There's going to be a tour of Jewish treasures coming to the United States. I don't know if that interests you. They were taken before when the Jews were sent to concentration camps. And the story out of Washington it's macabre but true. Most of them were shipped to gas chambers. Thousands of Jews in Moravia, in Bohemia, and other parts of Europe were ordered to mail their precious religious and household articles to the Nazis. They had no regard for the lives they were taking in the Holocaust, but the leaders of the Third Reich had a perverse desire to document the culture of those that they were going to murder. They wanted to keep all the Jewish artifacts after they were murdered. The worldly goods of condemned people, approximately 145,000 articles, range from violins and pianos and richly embroidered Torah cloths and kitchen items, carefully preserved that remain housed at the Jewish Museum in Prague in Czechoslovakia. Can you believe that? They preserved them there, and they're going to tour the United States. And after a long period of negotiations, 15 years, Mark Talisman, vice chairman of the Holocaust Center in Washington, said, "I'm delighted. After all, this was for the Nazis to have been a museum to an extinct race, and my objective is to bring the exhibition to a living, vibrant United States." So the Judaic treasures are going to be in Washington, D.C., and then they will be in San Diego, New York. In San Diego, the Museum of Art down there, Detroit Institute, I guess Henry Ford funded Adolf Hitler pretty heavily. Maybe he wants to take another look at them. He's dead. The family. Hartford, Connecticut, will be in Hartford, Connecticut. If you want to see the artifacts of objects that the Jews mailed to the Nazis, I don't know if I would send them things that I had if I got a letter asking for my artifacts. Maybe there's a gun in your back, which there was, but a lot of them sent them away. Maybe they thought they'd be safe till the war was over. The people aren't here, but the artifacts are touring the United States. There's something awfully gloomy about that. I wasn't too happy about that. The Pentagon is planning to beef up forces in Central America. Maybe Ronald Reagan will change his mind. They have the ceasefire in Lebanon. Here's one call. We're going to run out of time. I'll take this one now. Hello?
Hi, Mae?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Donald Saxby.
Okay.
I just thought I'd throw something out for fun because you've been researching for so long, and I've talked with you before, and after reading so much material and getting into so much decadence and evil, it seems to me some of it's practically impossible to understand unless you were of it. I mean, it seems to me to go beyond the human level, almost like to a satanic hierarchy. I mean,
well, it depends what you want to understand. What do you want to get out of it? What is your goal in reading it?
Well, to figure out how things can get so incredibly decadent. I mean, to the point where humans no longer need the money. They certainly don't need the power. I mean, they've got the money, they've got the power, and that they seem to delight.
Well,
just the sheer destruction of human beings, the torture, getting their glee out of it. I mean,
because one of the things I think is that the people that do the most power trip, it isn't a question of they've got the power now, they don't have to be mean. I think those people didn't have, say, some kind of psychological security when they were younger. So the pattern of being aggressive, even though it gets you to the top, doesn't get you happy.
right.
So that what the person who is secure or happy, if he works his way through circumstances, say like Andreas Papandreou in Greece, who's very calm, who's even-tempered, he was compared many times to John Kennedy. He's not a rabble-rouser, he's intellectual, and he doesn't oppress the people. He's offered a full-time pension to people who fought the war against the Nazis. And he seems to have a perspective, so he's not mean. And the only thing I can say is someone like Ronald Reagan, who was very poor. His father was alcoholic, and his mother didn't give him too many advantages, and he had to wheel and deal to get through school and do every sleazy trick, I guess, and probably not macho, so he had to put on a macho image, being sitting on his horse all day. He didn't go to war. So he has to play the role of Mr. Biggie because he probably never was Biggie anywhere. And as he worked his claws way up, he can't sit back and say, well, now I'm going to be nice to people.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but some of it gets so diabolical, it seems to me there almost has to be a superhuman influence.
Well,
certain realms that are
yeah,
mind-boggling.
Well, one of the problems I think that is diabolical is I think the New Testament scripture that says we're born evil, that we always have to get rid of original sin. I have a button collection, and one of them says, Jesus died for our crimes or sins. Let's not disappoint him. If you start a clean slate, assuming that you don't have to be bad because you're not evil,
Right.
then I think there are religions, say through the history of humanity, who are not quite as cruel. The Inquisition and the Middle Ages and the torture and the terror and the SAVAK that was trained by the CIA, or the DINA in Chile, the CIA. These are all done by very religious people. And I think, or even the Jewish religion has so much atoning for sins and So they'll do a few, you know. I don't know. I think that you'd have to take it one by one, the person or the leader who's evil, and read a lot of biographies and try to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I find it difficult to do because there seems to be a gap, and when you pass over a certain gap, then you run into this type of mentality where there doesn't even seem to be anything to appeal to, like an Idi Amin. I mean, it just seems so amoral.
Yeah, well,
there's nothing even to deal with there that's human anymore.
Yeah, but that's one reason I'm always interested in the assassinations, is that, say, people that are even-tempered, like, say, Adlai Stevenson, they're knocked off and killed.
You're right. Yeah.
See, they don't get a chance to live it until they get interested in who's doing the killing. If the good people, you know, the old quotation of Burke's, you know, how many people does it take the forces of evil to take over? If you do nothing, I'm paraphrasing it, you know, like I do Santayana's quotation, you know, if you don't read history, you're in for a bad time later. You know?
Oh, there's one point you mentioned on the air, I don't know, several weeks ago about Final Trace, that novel.
Yes.
And it was interesting in there where it came up towards the end, the consortium that was behind it all. And I thought it was an interesting point the guy made, though, when he said, yeah, but for all this madness and terror and horror, it takes the average little human being to do all this, to carry it out.
Well,
and I thought that was a good point. Because no matter how ghoulish they are, it still takes the average American or Russian or whoever to carry all the dirty work.
Well,
There'd be no mafia. There'd be none of this if the average little person didn't compromise and sell himself out.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. But I think that the average person, I always use this over and over again, and maybe it's wrong to say it, but I think that 80% of the population of any country, just across the board, are in there just existing, doing their daily things, not creatively doing, not mean and not kind particularly, but just doing their thing. I actually don't know if they have the mental capacity, if their IQs can be raised even with exposure. And then 10% of the people are doing the evil machinery and 10% are opposing them. And I suppose the influence, one way that the evil forces work, I think, is that they manufacture also like 22 million or billion Valium a year. And in between, they keep people on alcohol, they keep them on pills, they keep them on drugs so that they don't question the system. They got it so well medicated that people don't even question the system.
True, yeah.
There's poison in their foods. I mean, you go to people that are particular about what they eat, and they're very picky about that, what they see and hear, and you find inquisitive minds that ask questions and are really sharp. And the other people have really given themselves over, their parents have given them over in childhood with all the junk food and all the easy answers, and they fill themselves up. They're given all the television and all the recreation and entertainment, and so they let the evil people have handed that to them. If you see who owns the ball games, the football games, if you see who owns the baseball teams, if you see, I mean, just look at who owns those things.
Yeah, it's all pretty sewed up.
And they keep the slaves, just like Great Britain poured in narcotics to keep the Chinese happy.
Yeah, right.
So we're really a native population. They know that if we had a little time now, taking the Soviet Union when they didn't like the Tsar and the Bolsheviks were coming to power and they sat and had cell meetings and talked, the way they got their activities going was they didn't have a TV to turn on to. They weren't popping pills. There wasn't a pinball machine down at the grocery store. Or those kids wouldn't have had a revolution. They saw the Tsar.
Yeah, that's right.
And today, the system knows it. They'll give you video games. They'll give you movies at home. They'll give you home box office. One thing, the genius about the John Birch Society was it began with cell meetings. They never tell how many. And they are dedicated to what they have. Maybe the people that are economically a little more secure, and they may be narrow-minded, but they go to their meetings, and they're willing to give up the evenings and have one night a week, and they believe in it.
Yeah.
And they write letters to the editor, they'll call the talk shows, and they're very vocal because they're not fooled by all the tricks.
Yeah.
The Mormons have tight control over their children.
Right.
They don't let them get all, alcohol and certain foods and soft drinks and colas and coffees, and they keep that family pretty tight.
Yeah.
See, and when you do that, you get a different kind of person.
True.
Because when you turn these people loose who haven't been able to think for themselves, and some zombie comes along and says, let's make war with Russia, you say, sure, let's make war with Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What else to do? I read this week that that young people don't mind the idea of war because they're bored. They play war games because they're bored.
Yeah, well, the whole video game thing's interesting.
Yeah.
It's totally gears them for electronic war.
That's right.
So, I mean, it's the game.
That's right, and they're ready for it, and that's the way, if you allow that in your family, then they're going to grow up and be like that.
Right.
So it's hard to know what makes people mean, but I think it goes back to the cradle or from the time you're pregnant. I really do. I think there's a big factor there in what you wanted and how you accepted it and if you wanted it in the first place.
Well, it is. I don't know. It just seems to me there's a certain thing, and you really can't comprehend it unless you're of it, because it doesn't compute.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody actually getting their enjoyment out of torturing somebody gleeful. I mean, that's hard to comprehend.
Yeah, but you see, right now, you read the statistics of child abuse and incest and child pornography, you know? Well, it's current to try and weed it out to cure the situation because these people are having problems later and there's more open discussions on talk shows and books about it. But years ago it went on. Well, when somebody's abused or whipped, he'll grow up and he may whip and abuse.
Right.
And every time he cuts somebody up, like Michael Townley for the CIA down in Chile at Colonia Dignidad, if he's quartering people, I'm sure that every time he cuts a knife, he's probably, this one's for mom and this one's for dad or brother. I'm sure that his life was so tortured that he gets satisfaction out of doing it.
Jeez, it's amazing.
Yeah, or someone like Dan White is told, that homosexuality, like the supervisor, is so bad, or even Democrats are bad, or you're not a masculine person if you don't have a status and you're no longer on the supervisors, and you get very frustrated because somebody won the election out from under you. And you want his place because you don't think you're manly enough, and we have these false images of what's feminine, what's masculine, and then people have to live up to that. They don't, they thrash out and hurt somebody.
Yeah.
And those are false ideas, too. The people that don't have any of these things, and there's a lot of them, are very natural, normal people.
Yeah.
And you wonder why they're all responding the same, but they don't respond the same. Children in a family don't respond the same.
That's true. They really don't.
If you have one child and you're lucky enough to have, say, a gap of 4 or 5 years and give it your undivided attention, you could produce practically a genius. If you have another one within 18 months or so and you around the clock and they're close together, that takes away from the second one because the first one's always a little bit ahead.
Yeah.
So the second feels slow because one's walking and he's crawling and one's spelling and one's pushing and shoving. So, he thinks he's dumb because he doesn't do what his brother's doing, but he doesn't know the brother's a year older.
Right.
So that affects his personality. So he'll do things in society. As long as there's a dumb and a loser, he may as well not be an achiever. And I think that's what goes in his mind.
Yeah.
Well, listen, that's a little psychology on political reign. It's an interesting subject. I think about it a lot because there's more than just academic work in changing or thinking about the world problems.
Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I took a long time, but that's okay. We'll get ready for World Watchers because I won't have time for more calls now. That's for sure. There's a buzzing sound on the microphones here. I've been having trouble with the tape, so I've been doing them over. I brought in my own machine tonight because between the board and the tape, something makes a little noise here, and I can't figure out what it is.